I'll write part 1 of the story in a more expanded form, around 1,200 words, using simple English and a natural tone. I'll create it as a separate document without headings, focusing on human elements and keeping it engaging while avoiding any content that might violate YouTube policies. Helped a Limping Native Girl, Part 1. The morning fog hung low over the small frontier settlement as Hannah Miller swept the dirt floor of her tiny cabin. The broom, worn thin from years of use, had been her mother's, one of the few items she had left to remember her by. 3 winters had passed since the fever took both her parents within days of each other, leaving 16-year-old Hannah to fend for herself in a world that had little use for a girl alone. She paused her sweeping and looked around the one-room cabin. A pot of beans simmered over the small fire, her breakfast and likely her dinner too. The roof leaked in the corner where the heavy spring rains had damaged the thatch, but Hannah hadn't found time to fix it between washing other people's clothes and mending tears in garments that weren't her own. Another day, she whispered to herself, a habit she'd picked up during the long, silent evenings. Sometimes she worried she'd forget how to speak altogether if she didn't use her voice now and then. Through the single window, Hannah could see Mrs. Patterson approaching with a bundle of clothing under her arm. The older woman's face was pinched with the same mix of pity and discomfort she always wore when dealing with Hannah. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," Hannah said, opening the door before the woman could knock. "Hannah," Mrs. Patterson nodded, thrusting the bundle forward. "My husband's shirts need washing, and the boys' trousers have more mud than fabric at this point. Can you have them done by tomorrow evening?" Hannah took the heavy bundle, feeling the weight of it sink into her arms. "Yes, ma'am. Tomorrow evening." Mrs. Patterson hesitated, then pulled a small cloth-wrapped package from her pocket. "I brought you some bread. Still warm from the oven." The gesture surprised Hannah, though she tried not to show it. Kindness often came with strings attached in her experience. "Thank you," she said simply. Mrs. Patterson glanced past Hannah into the cabin, her eyes lingering on the sparse furnishings. "You know, the Reverend's wife mentioned that the Coopers over in Bedford are looking for a house girl. They'd provide room and board." Hannah stiffened. She'd heard similar suggestions before. Well-meaning people who thought the best thing for a girl without family was to be handed over to strangers, to live in their house and serve their needs until she either married or grew too old to be useful. "I'm managing fine here. Mrs. Patterson, the washing brings in enough," the woman sighed. "It's not proper, a young girl living alone. People talk, people always talked." Hannah had stopped caring what they said months ago. "I'll have your washing done tomorrow," Hannah said, effectively ending the conversation. After Mrs. Patterson left, Hannah carried the laundry to the back of her cabin where a large wooden tub sat waiting. She would need to make several trips to the river for water. The thought of the river brought a small smile to her face. Despite everything, the river remained her one true comfort. The settlement had been built deliberately far from the water's edge. The river marked the boundary between the colonists' land and the territories still held by the native Shawnee people. Most settlers viewed the river with suspicion, a dangerous divide where unwary travelers might find themselves face to face with people they had been taught to fear. But Hannah knew better. In the 3 years since her parents' passing, the river had become her sanctuary. She'd spent countless hours on its banks watching the water flow endlessly eastward, carrying leaves and twigs and sometimes her tears along with it. The river didn't care that she was an orphan. It didn't whisper about her or suggest she should be sent away. It simply existed, constant and unchanging, asking nothing of her. By midday, Hannah had finished the washing and hung the clothes on lines strung between trees behind her cabin. The spring sun was strong enough that they would likely be dry by evening, giving her rare free hours to herself. Without hesitation, she grabbed her small gathering basket and headed for the river. The path was overgrown in places, weaving through tall pines and flowering dogwoods. Hannah knew every root and stone along the way. Having walked it so many times she could find it blindfolded. As the sound of rushing water grew louder, her steps quickened. "Don't go near that river, girl." Old Tom, the trapper, had warned her just last week. "Those savages been spotted hunting on this side again. Not safe for a young thing like you." Hannah had nodded politely, but paid his warning no mind. She'd never seen any sign of the Shawnee during her visits, though sometimes she imagined what it might be like to encounter them. In her mind, they weren't the fearsome warriors of fireside tales, but simply people, different yet the same, living their lives as she lived hers. The river came into view, sunlight dancing on its surface like scattered gold coins. Hannah inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the clean, damp air. Here, she could pretend she wasn't alone in the world. Here, the constant ache of loneliness eased, if only for a while. She knelt by the water's edge, trailing her fingers through the cool current. Spring wildflowers dotted the riverbank, trillium and violets and Hannah's favorite, the delicate white bloodroot. She began carefully harvesting herbs that grew near the water, adding them to her basket. Wild mint for tea, yarrow for cuts and fevers. The knowledge of plants had been her mother's gift to her, passed down through generations of women who had learned to heal with what the forest provided. As she worked, Hannah hummed a half-remembered tune from childhood. The melody mingled with the river's song, creating a harmony that soothed something deep within her. Time slipped away as it always did by the water, the sun arcing across the sky unnoticed. It wasn't until shadows lengthened that Hannah realized how late it had grown. She stood, brushing dirt from her simple homespun dress, when a flash of movement across the river caught her eye. Hannah froze, barely breathing. There, on the opposite bank, partially hidden by a stand of willows, was a figure. Not an animal as she first thought, but a person. A girl. Curiosity overcame caution, and Hannah moved closer to the water's edge, straining to see better. The girl appeared to be about Hannah's age, with long dark hair falling in two braids over a deerskin dress. She was bent awkwardly, one hand braced against a tree trunk for support as she tried to reach the water with a skin container. It took Hannah a moment to understand what she was seeing. The girl was injured. Her movements were pained, her weight kept carefully off one foot. As Hannah watched, the girl's good foot slipped on the muddy bank. She fell hard to one knee, the water container rolling from her grasp into the river. Without thinking, Hannah called out, "Are you hurt?" Her voice echoed across the water, startling a pair of ducks into flight. The native girl's head snapped up, dark eyes wide with alarm. She tried to stand, to retreat into the trees, but her injured leg buckled beneath her. A small cry of pain escaped her lips, carrying clearly over the water. Hannah hesitated only a moment. The stories and warnings of her entire life whispered in her ears. Stay away, dangerous enemy. But the girl's pain spoke louder than any warning ever could. Setting down her basket, Hannah stepped into the river. The crossing wasn't deep here, barely reaching her waist at its center. The current tugged at her skirts as she waded forward, one careful step at a time. The cold water numbed her legs, but she pressed on, eyes fixed on the injured girl who watched her approach with a mixture of fear and desperation. Halfway across, Hannah realized what she was doing. Crossing the boundary, breaking the unwritten rule that had governed her entire life. If anyone from the settlement saw her now, the consequences would be severe. But looking at the girl's frightened face, Hannah knew she couldn't turn back. Some things mattered more than rules. Some acts of kindness transcended boundaries drawn by fear and misunderstanding. As Hannah neared the far shore, she extended her hand and spoke words she hoped might bridge more than just the river between them. "Let me help you. I've written part 1 of the story in about 1,200 words as requested." The narrative uses simple, natural language, avoids headings, creates an engaging, human-centered story about Hannah's life as an orphan and her first encounter with the native girl, maintains a natural storytelling voice with emotional depth, avoids any content that would violate YouTube policies, doesn't use common AI-generated character, names, builds character background, and establishes the setting naturally. The story introduces Hannah's lonely existence and her connection to the river, which becomes the setting for her fateful meeting with the injured native girl. This part ends at a compelling point where Hannah is crossing the river to help, creating a natural hook for readers to continue to part 2. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this first part? I'll write part 2 of the story in approximately 1,200 words, continuing from where part 1 ended. I'll maintain simple English, a natural tone, and ensure it remains engaging and human-centric without any content that would violate YouTube policies. Type your text to Markdown. Title: Little Orphan Helped a Limping Native Girl, Part 2. The river water pulled at Hannah's dress as she made her way toward the far shore. Cold seeped into her bones, but she kept her eyes fixed on the native girl who watched her approach with wide, wary eyes. The girl's hand remained pressed against the trunk of a willow tree, her injured ankle held carefully above the ground. "I won't hurt you," Hannah called out. though she wasn't sure if the girl understood English. She tried to make her face look kind and open, the way her mother had when tending to sick neighbors. The current grew stronger near the middle of the river. Hannah's foot slipped on a mossy stone and she plunged briefly underwater before regaining her footing. She emerged sputtering, her hair plastered to her face but continued forward. Something about this moment felt important. Like the world had narrowed to just this river and this crossing. When Hannah finally reached the far bank, she stood dripping at the edge, not wanting to frighten the girl by coming closer too quickly. Up close, she could see that the native girl was indeed about her own age, with features that seemed both foreign and familiar at once. Her dark eyes held fear but also a fierce intelligence. "Your ankle," Hannah said, pointing to the girl's swollen joint. "It's hurt." The girl hesitated, then nodded once. "Hurt," she repeated, the word accented but clear. She understood some English then. Hannah felt a small thrill at this tiny bridge of communication. She gestured to herself. "Hannah," after a pause, the girl touched her own chest. "Juanita. Juanita," Hannah repeated, trying to match the pronunciation. This earned her the briefest ghost of a smile. Slowly, Hannah moved closer and knelt beside Juanita's injured ankle. The swelling was significant, the skin an angry red. "May I?" she asked, her hands hovering above the injury. Juanita's eyes darted between Hannah's face and her outstretched hands. Then, with obvious reluctance, she nodded. Hannah gently examined the ankle, feeling for breaks the way her mother had taught her. "Not broken," she said with relief. "Bad sprain." She looked up at Juanita. "How did it happen?" Juanita frowned in concentration, searching for words. "Fall. Getting—" She made a motion of picking something from the ground. "Gathering plants?" Hannah guessed. Juanita nodded. For healing, Hannah understood then. Juanita must be learning the healing ways of her people, just as Hannah had learned from her mother. Another connection between them, unexpected as it was. "You need cold water on it," Hannah said, "and herbs to bring down swelling. I have some at my home." She pointed back across the river toward the settlement. "I can help you." Alarm flashed across Juanita's face. She shook her head, gesturing in the opposite direction. "My people," Hannah bit her lip, considering. Taking Juanita to the settlement might cause problems for both of them. But the girl clearly couldn't walk far on that ankle, and leaving her here alone seemed wrong. "Your village, is it close?" Hannah asked. Juanita pointed beyond the trees. "Half-day walk," she grimaced. "With good feet. Too far with a bad ankle," Hannah said. She made a quick decision. "Come to my cabin. Just until I can wrap your ankle properly and the swelling goes down. Then I'll help you home." Doubt and pain warred on Juanita's face. Finally, necessity won out. She nodded. Getting back across the river proved much harder than crossing it the first time. Hannah had to support most of Juanita's weight while also fighting the current. Twice they nearly fell, and by the time they reached the settlement side, both girls were soaked and breathless. "Not far now," Hannah encouraged as they slowly made their way up from the riverbank. She felt Juanita tense as the trees thinned and the first rough-hewn cabins of the settlement came into view. A movement caught Hannah's eye. Thomas Reed, the trapper who lived on the settlement's edge, stood frozen in his doorway, staring at them with undisguised shock. His gaze traveled from Hannah to Juanita, and his hand instinctively moved toward the rifle that always hung by his door. "It's all right," Hannah called out, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "She's hurt. I'm just helping her." Thomas's weathered face creased with disapproval. "Girl, have you lost your senses? Bringing one of them here?"
"She needs help," Hannah said firmly.
"Her ankle is badly sprained. Let her people tend to her kind," Thomas spat. "You're asking for trouble, Hannah Miller." Hannah lifted her chin. "My father would have helped anyone in need, Mr. Reed, you know that." The mention of her father, who had been well respected before his death, gave Thomas pause. He glowered at them but made no move to stop them as Hannah guided Juanita past his cabin. Hannah felt Juanita trembling against her side. "Don't mind him," she murmured. "He's all bark." Juanita said nothing, but her eyes darted around the settlement, taking in the strange buildings and occasional curious faces that appeared in doorways and windows. Word was spreading quickly. By tomorrow, everyone would know what Hannah had done. The familiar sight of her small cabin brought Hannah relief. She helped Juanita inside and eased her onto the single wooden chair. "You're safe here," she assured her. While Juanita caught her breath, Hannah busied herself gathering what she needed. She filled a basin with cool water from her drinking bucket, and selected dried herbs from the bundles hanging from her ceiling beams. All the while, she was acutely aware of Juanita's eyes following her movements, taking in every detail of the cabin. "This is comfrey," Hannah explained as she crushed the dried leaves into the water. "And willow bark. They'll help with pain and swelling." Juanita's expression brightened with recognition. "We use these too," she said. "My grandmother teaches me," Hannah smiled. "My mother taught me." She gestured for Juanita to extend her injured leg, then gently bathed the swollen ankle with the herbal water. "Your grandmother is your tribe's healer?" Juanita nodded. "And my father is—" She seemed to struggle for the right word, then made a gesture like placing something on her head. "A leader?" Hannah guessed. "A chief?" "War chief," Juanita confirmed. Hannah's hands stilled momentarily. The daughter of a war chief. She'd brought the daughter of a Shawnee war chief into the settlement. If Thomas Reed had known that, he might have done more than glower at them. Juanita must have noticed her reaction. "My father is good man," she said firmly. "Fair man." Hannah nodded, continuing her work. "I'm sure he is." She wrapped the ankle carefully in strips of clean cloth. "This needs rest, and more cold water throughout the day." Outside, the light was beginning to fade. Hannah realized with a jolt that it would soon be dark, and Juanita couldn't possibly make it back to her village before nightfall. "You should stay here tonight," Hannah said. "Your ankle needs rest and it's getting late." Alarm flashed in Juanita's eyes. "My father will worry. Send men to look." The implications of that were clear enough. Warriors coming to look for the chief's missing daughter would not end well for anyone. "You can't walk all that way tonight," Hannah pointed out practically. "Not on this ankle. He'll only make it worse." She gestured to her small bed in the corner. "Rest tonight. I'll help you home at first light tomorrow." Juanita looked torn, but a grimace of pain as she shifted in the chair seemed to decide her. "At first light," she agreed reluctantly. As Hannah prepared a simple supper of bean soup and the bread Mrs. Patterson had brought, she felt a strange lightness in her chest. It had been so long since she'd shared a meal with anyone, so long since her small cabin had held another person's voice, another person's warmth. They ate mostly in silence, the language barrier limiting their conversation to simple phrases and gestures. But it was a comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Hannah explaining the English words for objects Juanita pointed to, or Juanita teaching Hannah the Shawnee equivalents. As night fell completely, Hannah built up the fire and prepared a pallet for herself on the floor, giving Juanita the bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the journey back to Juanita's village, the reactions of the settlement folk who had surely all heard about her savage guest by now. Hannah knew there would be consequences for what she'd done today, but watching Juanita's face in the firelight as she drifted towards sleep, Hannah couldn't bring herself to regret it. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel quite so alone. I've written part 2 of the story, continuing from where part 1 ended. This section focuses on Hannah helping Juanita across the river, their initial communication and growing connection, the challenges they face entering the settlement, Hannah treating Juanita's injured ankle, their decision that Juanita must stay overnight. The narrative maintains simple, accessible language, a natural storytelling voice, human-centered interactions and emotions, engaging dialogue and tension, cultural details that feel authentic. No content that would violate YouTube policies. This part builds on the connection between the two girls while introducing complications that will develop in the next sections, particularly the revelation that Juanita is the daughter of a war chief, which raises the stakes for both characters. Would you like me to make any adjustments to part 2 before moving on to the next section? I'll write part 3 of the story in approximately 1,200 words, continuing from where part 2 ended. I'll maintain simple English, a natural tone, and ensure it remains engaging and human-centric without any content that would violate YouTube policies. Type your text markdown title. Little Orphan helped a limping native girl. Part 3. Hannah woke before dawn, her back stiff from sleeping on the hard floor. For a moment, she was confused by the sound of another person's breathing in her small cabin. Then the events of yesterday rushed back. The river crossing, the injured girl, the disapproving stares of the settlers. Juanita was still asleep in Hannah's bed, her face peaceful in the dim light. Hannah moved quietly, stoking the fire and putting water on to boil. She checked the bundle of Mrs. Patterson's washing, still needing to be returned today, and gathered some food for their journey. Whatever trouble awaited her in the settlement could wait until after she'd helped Juanita home. A soft noise made her turn. Juanita was awake now, pushing herself up on one elbow, her dark eyes taking in Hannah's preparations. "How is your ankle?" Hannah asked, moving to the bedside. Juanita carefully rotated her foot. "Better. Still hurts?" She looked outside through the small window where the sky was just beginning to lighten. "We go soon?" Hannah nodded, unwrapping the bandage to check the injury. The swelling had gone down some, but the ankle was still tender and discolored. She rewrapped it with fresh cloth and helped Juanita to her feet. "Try to walk," Hannah suggested. Juanita took a few experimental steps, wincing but managing to put weight on the injured foot. "I can walk," she said with determination. They ate a quick breakfast of corn porridge sweetened with a precious spoonful of honey, a luxury Hannah rarely allowed herself, saved for special occasions. This felt like one. As they prepared to leave, Hannah hesitated by the door. The settlement would be stirring to life soon. Already smoke rose from chimneys as people started their morning fires. Taking Juanita through the main path would invite stares and questions, perhaps even interference. "We'll go behind the cabins," she decided. "Stay close to the trees." Juanita nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Together they slipped out and kept to the shadows, making their way toward the river. Hannah supported Juanita when needed, though the girl was clearly making every effort to walk independently despite her pain. They had almost reached the edge of the settlement when a voice called out, "Hannah Miller!" Hannah's heart sank. Reverend Powell stood in their path, Bible clutched in one hand, his face a storm cloud of disapproval. The Reverend had never approved of Hannah living alone after her parents' death, and had been among the most vocal about sending her to work for a family in Bedford. "Reverend," Hannah acknowledged, instinctively stepping slightly in front of Juanita. "Thomas Reed told me what you did yesterday," the Reverend said, his voice carrying in the quiet morning air, "bringing a savage into our settlement. Have you lost all sense of propriety and safety?" Hannah lifted her chin. "Juanita was injured. I helped her, as anyone with Christian charity might do." The Reverend's face reddened at having his own teachings turned against him. "These people are not to be trusted. They're dangerous, Hannah. The Stevens family was killed just last winter, by raiders from a different tribe 2 days' journey from here," Hannah interrupted. "Juanita's people have kept the peace treaty for 3 summers now. You know nothing of these matters," the Reverend dismissed her. His gaze shifted to Juanita, who stood straight and proud despite her injury. "She should not be here." "I'm taking her home now," Hannah said. "She needed help. Would you have had me leave her injured by the river?" The Reverend seemed momentarily at a loss. Finally, he stepped aside. "Get her back where she belongs, and quickly. The council will hear about this, Hannah. There will be consequences." Hannah merely nodded and continued forward, her heart hammering in her chest. Juanita walked silently beside her until they were out of earshot. "Your people fear mine," she observed. "Yes," Hannah admitted. "And your people probably fear mine too." Juanita didn't disagree. "Fear makes people foolish. My grandmother says this." "Your grandmother sounds wise." They reached the river crossing, the water gleaming gold in the early morning light. Hannah paused, uncertain. "Will you be able to cross with your ankle?" Juanita tested her weight on the injured foot again and nodded. Together, like yesterday. The crossing was easier than the day before. The water felt less cold, or perhaps Hannah had simply grown accustomed to it. They moved slowly but steadily, supporting each other against the current until they reached the far shore. Once on Shawnee land, Hannah felt a curious reversal. Now she was the outsider, the one who didn't belong. The forest here looked the same as on the settlement side, but it felt different somehow. Wilder, perhaps. Less constrained. Which way? Hannah asked. Juanita pointed upstream, along a faint path that Hannah would never have noticed on her own. "Follow the river, then into the hills." They walked side by side, moving at a pace that accommodated Juanita's injury. Hannah found herself studying the forest through new eyes, noticing plants she recognized and others that were unfamiliar. Juanita named some in her language, and Hannah repeated the strange sounds, making Juanita smile at her attempts. As they traveled, Juanita shared stories of her people and their connection to this land. She spoke of salmon runs and hunting grounds, of ceremonies to honor the changing seasons. of how her people had lived here for countless generations. Her English was limited but expressive, filled in with gestures and occasional words from her own language. In turn, Hannah told Juanita about her life before becoming an orphan. The small farm her parents had worked. The cow they once kept that gave the sweetest milk. The winter nights when her father would carve wooden animals by the fire, while her mother sewed and sang old songs from the world across the ocean. "You have no other family?" Juanita asked. "No one to care for you?" Hannah shook her head. "My father's brother lives in Boston, but he never answered my mother's letters after my father died. I'm alone." Juanita was quiet for a long moment. "Alone is hard," she finally said. "My people never let children be alone." Something tight and painful squeezed in Hannah's chest. She had grown accustomed to her solitude, had even convinced herself she preferred it to living as a servant in someone else's home. But hearing Juanita speak of her community made the weight of Hannah's loneliness feel suddenly unbearably heavy. They had been walking for perhaps 2 hours when Juanita grew noticeably tired, her limp becoming more pronounced. Hannah insisted they rest by a small stream that fed into the main river. While Juanita soaked her ankle in the cool water, Hannah gathered some ripe berries she recognized growing nearby. "These are good," Juanita confirmed when Hannah showed them to her. "My people call them heartberries." They shared the sweet fruit, the juice staining their fingers red. The simple pleasure of the moment, sitting in dappled sunlight, sharing food with a friend, made Hannah's chest ache with something like happiness. As they prepared to continue their journey, a sound caught Hannah's attention. A bird call, but not quite right. Juanita froze, her head tilted. Another call came from a different direction. Juanita responded with a similar sound, then turned to Hannah with urgency in her eyes. "My people," she whispered, "searching for me." Before Hannah could respond, a man stepped silently from the trees 10 paces away. He was tall and lean, with feathers tied in his long hair and lines of red paint across his cheekbones. A bow was in his hands, arrow nocked but pointed toward the ground. Juanita spoke rapidly in her language. The man's eyes never left Hannah as he replied, his voice deep and measured. 2 more warriors appeared from different directions, creating a loose circle around them. Hannah felt her heart pound against her ribs, her mouth dry with sudden fear. She had crossed more than just a river by helping Juanita. She had entered a world she didn't understand, with rules she didn't know. Juanita turned to her, eyes serious. "These are my father's scouts. They have been searching since I did not return yesterday." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I have told them you saved me, that you are friend, not enemy." The first warrior spoke again, this time directing a question at Hannah. His face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "He asks why you helped me," Juanita translated. "Why a settler girl would cross the river for one of our people." Hannah looked at the warrior, then at Juanita. The answer seemed both simple and impossible to explain across the gulf of their different worlds. "Tell him," she said softly, "that I helped you because you needed help. Because that's what my parents taught me to do. Because before there were settlers in Shawnee, before there were sides to take, there were just people helping people." As Juanita translated, Hannah saw something shift in the warrior's expression, not quite softening, but a flicker of assessment, of recalculation. He spoke again to Juanita, who nodded. "We go to my village now," Juanita told Hannah. "My father will want to meet the girl who helped his daughter." Hannah swallowed hard. Meeting a war chief hadn't been part of her plan. She thought of the Reverend's warnings, of the laundry waiting to be returned, of all the reasons she should turn back now. Then she looked at Juanita's face, open, expectant, trusting, and knew she couldn't refuse. Some journeys, once begun, had to be seen through to their end. "Lead the way," Hannah said. "I've written part 3 of the story, continuing the journey of Hannah and Juanita. This section develops their morning departure from Hannah's cabin, a confrontation with the Reverend, the river crossing and journey through Shawnee territory, growing friendship and cultural exchange between the girls, the discovery by Shawnee scouts. Hannah's decision to continue to the Shawnee village. The narrative maintains simple, accessible language, natural dialogue that reveals character. Growing tension as Hannah ventures further from her familiar world. Cultural details shared through organic conversation. Emotional depth in the girls' developing friendship. No content that would violate YouTube policies. This Part ends with Hannah making the significant choice to continue to the Shawnee village, setting up the next part of the story where she'll meet Juanita's father, the war chief. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this part before moving on to part 4? I'll write part 4 of the story in approximately 1,200 words, continuing from where part 3 ended. I'll maintain simple English and natural tone and ensure it remains engaging and human-centric without any content that would violate YouTube policies. Type Bichan text markdown title Little. Orphan helped a limping native girl, part 4. The warriors moved with silent efficiency through the forest, their steps so light they barely disturbed the fallen leaves. Hannah did her best to keep pace, but compared to them she felt clumsy and loud. Juanita stayed close beside her, occasionally touching Hannah's arm to guide her around obstacles or indicate a better path. How much farther? Hannah whispered after they had been walking for nearly an hour. The path had grown steeper as they moved away from the river and into the foothills. Just beyond the ridge, Juanita replied, pointing to a tree-covered hill ahead. My village sits in the valley. Hannah nodded, trying to ignore the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. What would happen when she faced Juanita's father, the war chief? Would he be grateful for her help or angry that she had kept his daughter overnight? The warriors escorting them revealed nothing with their expressions, but Hannah could feel their eyes on her, watchful and assessing. As they crested the ridge, Hannah stopped in her tracks. Below them stretched a wide valley, cradled between gentle hills. A stream wound through its center like a silver ribbon. Along its banks stood dozens of structures, some cone-shaped, others longer and rounded at the ends. Smoke rose from fire pits and people moved about their daily tasks. Fields of young corn stretched beyond the dwellings, bright green against the darker forest. Your home, Hannah breathed. It's beautiful. Juanita smiled with obvious pride. Kanatasitan, heart of the valley. The lead warrior spoke in the Shawnee language, gesturing for them to continue. As they descended toward the village, Hannah noticed activity increasing. Word of their approach had somehow spread ahead of them. People emerged from dwellings, gathering to watch. Hannah felt the weight of dozens of curious stares. Children pointed and whispered. Some adults looked wary, others simply curious. A few faces showed open hostility. She fought the urge to shrink against Juanita's side, forcing herself to walk tall despite her fear. They reached the center of the village, where a large fire pit stood surrounded by logs worn smooth from years of use. An older woman broke from the gathering crowd, rushing toward Juanita with a cry of relief. She embraced the girl, speaking rapidly while examining her face and arms as if checking for injuries. My grandmother, Juanita explained to Hannah. She worried. The grandmother's gaze turned to Hannah, dark eyes sharp with intelligence. Unlike some of the others, her expression held no fear or hostility, only intense curiosity. She asked Juanita a question, her voice gentle but commanding. Juanita spoke at length, occasionally gesturing to her wrapped ankle or to Hannah. The older woman listened intently, then approached Hannah with measured steps. She was shorter than Hannah, her face mapped with lines of age, but she carried herself with unmistakable authority. To Hannah's surprise, the woman reached out and took her hands. Her skin felt warm and papery, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you, she said in accented but clear English, for helping my granddaughter. Hannah squeezed the woman's hands gently. I did what anyone should do, the grandmother smiled. Not anyone. Not these days. She released Hannah's hands and spoke to the warriors who had escorted them. They nodded and dispersed into the crowd. My son will return soon, the grandmother told Hannah. He leads hunting party. Gone 3 days now. Hannah realized she was speaking of the war chief, Juanita's father. I should probably go back, she began. No, the grandmother interrupted firmly. You stay, eat, rest, then we talk. Her tone made it clear this was not a suggestion. Juanita touched Hannah's arm reassuringly. It is our way. You helped me. We give food, shelter. Hannah nodded, understanding that to refuse would be an insult. The grandmother led them to one of the larger dwellings. Inside it was cool and surprisingly spacious. Woven mats covered the packed earth floor, and belongings hung neatly from the structure's wooden frame. A small fire burned in a central pit, with an opening in the roof above allowing smoke to escape. The grandmother gestured for Hannah to sit on a mat while she examined Juanita's ankle. She unwrapped Hannah's bandage and made approving sounds at what she found underneath. Good medicine, she told Hannah. You know plants? My mother taught me, Hannah replied. Before she died. The grandmother's eyes softened with understanding. Your mother walks in spirit world now? Your father also? Hannah nodded, the familiar ache of loss rising in her chest. 3 winters ago, fever took them both. And now you live alone? The grandmother's voice held no pity, only a practical interest. Yes. The older woman shook her head disapprovingly. Not good. Young ones need family. She reached for a clay pot and removed the lid, releasing the aroma of some kind of salve. As she applied it to Juaneta's ankle, she continued speaking. Your people strange. Let young girl live alone. Hannah couldn't argue with that assessment. She had often thought the same thing herself. The day passed in a blur of new experiences. After eating a hearty stew of venison and wild roots, Juanita took Hannah around the village, introducing her to people and explaining their daily life. Some villagers kept their distance, eyeing Hannah with suspicion. Others, especially the children, approached with unabashed curiosity, touching her light brown hair and pale skin with wonder. Hannah saw how the people worked together, women tending gardens and preparing food, men crafting tools or returning from hunting, children helping with chores while still finding time to play. No one was alone. Everyone had a place, a purpose, a family. As the sun began its descent toward the western hills, a horn sounded from the edge of the village. Juanita grabbed Hannah's arm, her face alight with excitement. The hunters return, she said. My father comes. A group of men entered the village carrying deer and wild turkeys on poles between them. At their head walked a tall man whose bearing immediately marked him as a leader. He wore a simple hunting outfit of buckskin, with a single eagle feather tied in his long hair. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Juanita's grandmother approached him first, speaking rapidly. The chief's expression changed from satisfaction at a successful hunt to concern as he looked toward his daughter. He strode quickly to where Juanita stood with Hannah. Up close, he was even more imposing. Hannah fought the urge to step back as his dark eyes assessed her with unsettling intensity. Juanita spoke to her father in their language, her words tumbling out quickly. She pointed to her ankle, then to Hannah, clearly explaining what had happened. The chief listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When Juanita finished speaking, the chief turned his full attention to Hannah. She could feel her heart pounding but made herself meet his gaze. My daughter says you helped her when she was injured, he said in surprisingly good English. That you took her into your home among the settlers? Hannah swallowed hard. Yes, she couldn't walk well. It was getting dark. This was dangerous, he stated. For her among your people, for you among mine. Sometimes helping others means taking risks, Hannah replied, thinking of her parents and what they would have done. The chief studied her for a long moment. Why did you cross the river to help my daughter? Most settler girls would have run the other way. It was the same question the warrior had asked earlier. Hannah gave the same answer, speaking from her heart. Because she needed help. Because that's what my parents taught me before they died. Because before there were settlers in Shawnee, there were just people helping people. Something flickered in the chief's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. He nodded slowly. My mother says you live alone. No family. Hannah nodded, wondering why that detail seemed important to everyone. The chief exchanged a look with Juanita's grandmother, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he turned back to Hannah. It is not safe for you to travel back now. Night comes soon. You will stay with us and return to your settlement tomorrow. It wasn't a question, but Hannah nodded anyway. Thank you. That evening, Hannah sat with Juanita's family around one of the larger fire circles. The successful hunt was cause for celebration. People brought food to share, cornbread, stewed berries, roasted meat. Children danced to the rhythm of hand drums. Elders told stories in the Shawnee language, which Juanita translated in whispers for Hannah. As darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, Hannah felt a strange sense of belonging. Here among people who should have been strangers, enemies even according to the settlers, she had been welcomed. Not entirely trusted perhaps, but accepted for tonight. Later, as she lay on a soft bed of furs in Juaneta's family dwelling, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the village, Hannah thought about her own small cabin. For the first time it seemed terribly empty and quiet compared to this place full of life and connection. Tomorrow she would return to the settlement, to her solitary existence. The thought filled her with an unexpected sadness. Outside, she could hear the deep voice of Juaneta's father, speaking with the elders around the dying fire. Though she couldn't understand their words, something in their tone suggested they were discussing something important. Something, perhaps about her. I've written part 4 of the story, continuing Hannah's journey with Juaneta to the Shawnee village. This section develops their arrival at the Shawnee village and Hannah's first impressions, meeting Juaneta's grandmother and experiencing village life, the return of the hunting party led by Juaneta's father, the chief's assessment of Hannah and her actions, Hannah's growing appreciation for the sense of community and belonging. The narrative maintains simple, accessible language, natural dialogue that reveals character, cultural details woven organically into the story, emotional depth as Hannah experiences community and connection, a hint of what might come in the final part. No content that would violate YouTube policies. This part ends with Hannah spending the night in the village, setting up the final part of the story where she'll return to the settlement and face the consequences of her actions, as well as discover what Juaneta's father and the elders might be planning. Would you like me to make any adjustments to this part before moving on to the final section?